I know, it's been a minute, but this has been a year of languishing. I mean, we're sort of post-COVID. I'm fully vaxxed, boosted, and we've seen a return to travel with the family and for work, but it's hardly been a return to normal. I mean, I love working from home. My wife and I are luxuriating in our own personal home office space and rediscovering our love for leftovers for lunch. I mean, I love that. There's no way you're going to microwave fish at the office, but that has nothing on the serious funk reheated doenjang has, which frankly is delicious for lunch. But man, I'm just finding I'm unable to actually keep to a 40-hour work week. And the work week is extending out into the weekends and into the evenings. And not even for the sake of heroic productivity, but simply trying to keep my head above water. I mean, hustle culture is toxic. No company deserves your undying fealty working at the expense of everything else. I know that. I believe that. And yet, still, my days were completely filled up with meeting after meeting, leaving only the evenings to actually get work done. And I know my imposter syndrome is hardly unique or revelatory, but still, I just felt like I had to work doubly hard to even seem mildly competent. And as soon as you get down that path, it can quickly spiral. And that's where I was at. So it's been quite a year. I mean, things are better now. But an offshoot of that is that at the end of the day, after working all day long on the computer, the last thing I want to do is stay at that computer and think about what my next booktube video is going to be or do any sort of video editing. I've made a conscious effort to shut the computer off and step away at the end of the day. But at least my reading has been pretty steady this year, non-slumpy. I mean, nowhere near the heights of previous years, but well on track to being about a book a week. And it's been a really strange year in reading. The internet has enabled endless choice. The long tail has gotten way more exposure than in previous years when we had to rely on traditional print media and books that were front-faced at the local bookstore as far as bookish exposure. Social media has dragged genre out of the literary ghetto. Romance is mainstream now, to say nothing of LGBTQ romance, which was hardly a thing 10, 15 years ago, or at least not at the level of ubiquity it seems to be at now. Fantastic. And the level of representation I'm seeing in the books out there on the shelves is also incredible and fantastic. But conversely, I'm finding myself lost when it comes to new releases. I mean, the Booker Prize has always been a little inscrutable, but this year's National Book Awards, not only had I not read a single book on the long list, I hadn't even heard of them. I mean, last year, Hell of a Book won the prize, but by that time I'd already read Cloud Cuckoo Land and Bewilderment, and Kitty Kitamura's Intimacies and Laura Groff's Matrix are on my TBR pile. The year before that, who hadn't heard of Shuggie Bain? Not to mention A Vanishing Half, Leave the World Behind, A Burning, and Lydia Millet's A Children's Bible. This year, solid blank, nothing. Although, I admit, I'm starting to see Trust and Night Crawling a little bit more now. But all this to say, I think the long tail has just left me behind. But there's something else that happened this year. Sure, there's more diversity in the book world, more room for genre, more space for works in translation, but this paradox of choice has led to a consolidation of attention. This summer, Colleen Hoover held 6 of the top 10 spots in the New York Times bestseller list. Over in music, Taylor Swift became the first artist ever to claim all 10 spots in the Billboard Top 10 at the same time. People faced with a complete abundance of choice are finding that their focus is narrowing on a smaller group of people than ever before. I mean, it's just overwhelming. We almost want to be told what to like. An average reader reads, 12 books a year? There's just way too many books that are being released at any given moment. We just want to be told what to like. It's the memification of books. And in large part, it's thanks to TikTok. And I don't know what to make of that, really. We'll see what 2023 brings. I mean, if legislators have its way, maybe TikTok will be banned in the United States. I mean, based on fears of the Chinese government collecting information on its users, but probably no more than what Meta does right now. I'm sure they would appreciate any sort of stay against TikTok, which is confusing publishers and everyone else, really. And it'll allow Instagram Reels to catch up in the meantime. But I digress. At this point, it's starting to feel like one of those cooking blogs where all you did is come here to get the recipe for your Tuscan white bean sausage, kale, pasta, and you've had to read 15 paragraphs starting with remembering Sunday mornings going out with your grandpa to milk the cows. I mean, this is a long roundabout way for me to tell you that this is what you should read. These are some of the books that I absolutely love this year, and maybe it is a reflection of the past year that they are so predominantly normie. But regardless, let's get into it. Lessons in Chemistry. You've probably already heard about this book. No doubt it will see another spike in interest once the movie adaptation starring Brie Larson comes out. This is one of my favorite books of the year. It's got shades of Where'd You Go, Bernadette? It's a sharp feminist tale, which I know makes it sound sort of weighty, overburdened, and heaven forbid, woke, but I think the best word I've heard used to describe this book is fizzy. I mean, our protagonist still does have to deal with misogyny, dismissiveness, petty jealousies, incredible loss, and sexual assault, but there is also a chapter that's narrated completely by their pet dog. Our protagonist, Elizabeth Zott, is gorgeous, fearless, smart, but not for nothing. She's also a woman in the 1960s, which means that she's constantly overlooked, taken for granted, dismissed, despite being an incredibly talented and innovative chemist. There's this burgeoning love interest with the Nobel Prize-nominated Calvin, who also happens to be a fantastic rower. Their genius in the making child, and Elizabeth transitioning from her job as a chemist to begrudgingly becoming the host of a mid-afternoon TV cooking show that becomes a nationwide sensation. So yes, the book follows its own sort of bookish logic, but it was a ton of fun, the perfect beach read, or, considering the weather outside, the perfect Christmas holiday by the fire read. It is your oat milk eggnog with a hearty spike of bourbon. The one thing I will quibble about is the cover. I would love Bonnie Gramus to put on her creative director hat and hear what she thinks about it. I think it sells it more as a slapstick romance, really undersells what's in the book itself. But that is my only quibble as far as the book goes. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabriel Zevin. You see what I mean as far as normie reads go? I mean, much like Lessons in Chemistry, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow was everywhere in the bookish world. Amazon rated it its best book of 2022 for crying out loud. I was prompted to read this after watching the movie adaptation of Zevin's earlier work, The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry. The movie is the perfect Sunday afternoon comfort watch. And that book and movie pandered to us bookish sorts. And I feel like with Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, Zevin is targeting those with a nostalgic remembrance of video games. Our protagonist, Sadie Green San Mazer, first connect playing Super Mario Bros. In an LA children's hospital. They reconnect a decade later in a Boston subway as Sam repeats that classic video game line, Sadie Miranda Green, you have died of dysentery. The two of them would go on to create a blockbuster game called Ichigo right out of the gate, and the story follows them with their creative tensions as they try to create thoughtful video games. I love a review by Tom Bissell, who co-wrote What Became of Edith Finch, one of my favorite video games. And he talks about this type of person called a literary gamer that this book might appeal to. Like writing about art and fiction, writing about video games can be hard. It can be all vague and hand-wavy, or it can get just mired into the details, but Zevin manages to thread that needle well. My only complaint is the manipulative heartstrings that Zevin is so good at pulling. Much like Fikry, Tomorrow and Tomorrow has a third act zag that can be a little devastating, but how she writes about the aftermath that is both hopeful and bittersweet. And I find I like a little bit of bittersweet in my novel because it's a hard sentiment to pull off. And while I hate myself for being so clearly manipulated into this emotion, I can't help but enjoy this particular read. Those are my two frontlist titles, but I also read some backlist this year I really enjoyed. I spent some time with Lauren Bukes earlier with Broken Monsters, which I really loved. And this year I really enjoyed her book, The Shining Girls, sitting by a pool in the Dominican. Now, I'd hardly call the story of a time-traveling serial killer a beach read, but this was sort of the page-turner book that I needed at the time. And I know a lot of heavy lifting as far as the enjoyment of this particular book is being done by the fact that I'm escaping a Canadian winter, sitting underneath the tropical sun, a mojito in hand, a book in the other, really enjoying this book. It's 1990, and Kirby Mizrachi is a survivor of a violent attack, and she's trying to find her assailant with the help of an ex-homicide reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, Dan Velasquez. The problem is, her assailant, one Harper Curtis, is a time traveler. He could be anywhere in Chicago, anywhen between 1930 and 1990. And sure, he leaves anachronistic tokens beside each of his victims, but when you have a century's worth of crimes to somehow connect, it seems unlikely that they're ever going to get justice. So I wanted to find out how they were going to unravel this crime. Now, fair warning, this thing is violent, gruesome, veering well into horror territory with elements of the supernatural, but it was the absolute plot-driven, page-turner, barn burner of a book that I needed to read at that moment. And finally, Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. This is another one of those books that was ubiquitous in the bookish world last year, and this was on my Pinterest TBR pile, but every time I went to the bookstore, meaning to pick it up, something new and shiny would catch my attention. I would grab that instead. And it might have languished on this TBR pile for a long, long time had it not been for the Book Ride podcast. Every year, they have a bookish recommendation episode where people can write in looking for bookish recommendations for their dad who loves World War II nonfiction and presidential biographies, looking for a next meaty fiction read, or the aunt that's looking for some bookish Gilmore Girls vibes for a next read. So I wrote in, I wanted front list, lit bro read, sort of, I don't know, an author that had completed AP English at least. Your Jack Reacher is written by Jesmyn Ward. Your David Baldacci and James Patterson with Ishiguro's chops. Rambo action with Marilyn Robinson prose. And Rebecca Shinsky, the host of the show, came through with a recommendation for Razorblade Tears, which sealed the deal. Picked up the book finally and started into it. And this was such a great read. It is an odd couple thriller revenge story. Buddy Lee Jenkins and Riot Randolph have, literally nothing in common. Oh, I mean, sure, they're both middle-aged men who've both served a hard time and have a violent past, but Buddy Lee Jenkins is an alcoholic, white trash redneck, and Ike Randolph is trying to fly the straight and narrow as an entrepreneurial black man with his own successful property management business. It's not until their two gay sons, who are married, are violently killed that they find common ground. The police investigation has gone cold, and they're not content to let this crime go unpunished. And so they set out and use their unique set of skills to solve this crime. And the stakes keep getting higher and higher. I mean, both of these men had no time for their sons, were unable to accept them for who they were or the love that they have. And now that they're dead, it's too late to make amends, but at least they can make sure that their crimes do not go unpunished. I'm already fan casting the subsequent inevitable movie, I'm sure. Daniel Craig and Idris Elba, or Matthew McConaughey and Denzel Washington. This was a hell of a fun read, and I'm so grateful for Rebecca Shinsky for making the recommendation and getting me to finally pick this book up. Well, I guess that's it for me. These are my recommendations for books that you need to read this year, because I'm telling you, and because there's just too much choice and you need to be told, frankly, what to read next. It seems fitting. The last video I did was after we dropped my daughter off for her semester abroad in Germany. And this is the first video as we just picked her up from the airport Christmas Day, as her semester in Germany had ended. She had a great time in Europe. So jealous. A ton of FOMO my wife and I had looking at those photos from her trip. Anyway, who knows if this will continue on or not. Certainly out of practice. We'll see what the editing is going to be like too. It's been so long since I've done that. So we'll see if this ever sees the light of day. But in any case, if this gets out before the end of the year, Happy New Year to you. Hopefully you had a great holiday break, and maybe we'll see you again sometime in the near future. Cheers.